Good morning, friends. Summer is here and the blackberries are almost ripe. The strawberries are almost done. The bean plants are flowering. The cucumber plants are putting on some cucumbers. And I've got a lot of summer vegetables planted. The tomatillos are much larger than I expected, and the ground cherries are smaller than I expected. The kale is doing so well. It's lasting and lasting, especially my blue Scotch kale. Now, the taste is not as sweet as the weather gets warmer, but it's doing great and it's still a good leafy green if I pick it in the mornings. Also, the red kale, I harvested all of the lower leaves on the plant and left the very top of the plant, and it has come back in full force. So come along with me and let's take a walk in the garden. Part of my plan in the garden is to spread things out and make it diverse, and that helps with pest pressure because it confuses our pests and makes it difficult for them to distinguish which plant they're looking for. So my tomato hornworm may maybe catch a whiff of a tomato, but it's hidden amongst a brassica and maybe an allium. Or the squash vine borer may catch a whiff of my zucchini squash plant, but there's brassicas in this bed. And then I've also got a tomato plant. The diverse planting method is meant to really not take as much nutrients out of the soil for one specific type of plant. So it helps with soil health, and it also helps with pest pressure. Also, it helps me learn about their different growth habits, and how that pepper that's in the wooden raised bed might be impacted by its surroundings or the light that it gets. And so it helps me learn more about the plants as they're planted next to different things and in different locations throughout the garden. It also helps me learn more about my garden. So every garden's a little bit different. Your space is going to be different. Your lighting, the temperature, the way that it frosts will be different, even from one bed to another. So you'll see a lot of mixed things in the garden. So I've tried to sprinkle things throughout and make sure that we have a good mix of things everywhere. So my carrot flowers are bringing me a lot of enjoyment. You can see that some of these flowers are just starting to bloom and they're beautiful. However, I don't need all of these carrot seeds. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna leave this original first flower so that it can go to seed, and I'm sure I'll get plenty of carrot seeds off of it. Carrot seeds are not real long lasting anyway, so I don't want to save them for multiple seasons. I just want enough seeds for what I need. However, these flowers are still really good for the pollinators, and they're attracting them, and they're beautiful. So I'm going to leave the flowers that are still flowering and go ahead and top the ones that are no longer flowering, because I don't need all of these seeds. So what that will do is that will make the carrot plant put off more of these beautiful small flowers and feed the pollinators. My San Marizanos are fruiting, and I have trained them by removing suckers and tying them to one stem per plant. However, my yellow pears have gone a little bit crazy. You can see how much more they have grown than the San Marizanos. Some tomato plants are much more aggressive than others, and the yellow pear is definitely one of those. that's aggressive, but very prolific. Look at all those tomatoes. I can't wait to get the first tomato of the season. Now this tomato I tied and it actually broke the stem about 80 or 90% of the way through. But this plant is still living off of that stem, and I'm gonna tie it to see how long I can keep it living. But I was sad that I had put too much pressure on the plant and it had cracked. One thing that I have been trying very hard to pay attention to is airflow. And where these are so prolific, it's very difficult to make sure that they're getting enough airflow. So if I see two leaves that are touching and overlapping, I will try to remove one of them. So I want a lot of airflow. I don't want leaves touching, because that can really lead to some mildew and things, and tomatoes are really sensitive to that. They need a lot of airflow. These tomatoes came from a local grower. I'm really not sure what kind of tomato they are, but they are coming on nice and round. So I'm anxious to see how these turn out. I know what the original tomato looked like, where I saved the seeds from, but I'm not really sure how these will turn out. These down here are all black cherry tomatoes, and they're off to a very slow start. I've got probably too many plants here. I've got about 5 black cherry tomato plants. They're gonna climb this half of the trellis. Now my sugar snap peas I've been pulling out as the plants die back, but there are a few on here still that I'm saving for seed. Here in this corner I did actually pull my lettuce plant, and I planted 4 of the eggplants. I'll put the variety here on the screen, but they are a purple and white striped eggplant. I'm very excited about those. These are the Greasy Grits beans, pole beans, and they are flowering. Beautiful flowers. We've got lots of pollinators this morning in the garden. I have had to thin away some leaves that have really gotten some dirt splashed up on them, and they were starting to look spotty. So that's the thing you've got to watch for, is when a leaf is too close to the ground and it gets spotty, it can spread disease on your plant. So I like to remove those leaves and take them onto the compost. Now if your compost gets hot, if it's at least 3 foot by 3 foot, it'll get hot enough to kill any disease or seeds. But it's got to have that heat in order to do that. So these asparagus beans are way above my head now and coming to the top of that trellis. I'm very excited about those. These are long, yard-long beans. On this side of this trellis, I've got some more of the eggplant and a couple pepper plants. And then another better bush hiding over here. I've got a few leeks that didn't fit over in the other bed, and these blue Scotch kale will probably come out to allow more room for this zucchini plant to spread out. These are our bonus beans. So I actually thinned the Greasy Grits from the other side of the garden over there and brought them over here to see if they would survive, and every single plant has survived. I've started training them up the trellis, and they are climbing, and they're doing really well. Here's another leaf I probably should go ahead and remove, just because it keeps my plant healthy. And these stems that are dead, they can be removed as well. There's another little lovely mushroom. We've harvested a couple of cabbage here, and I actually took one of my okra plants and moved it to another part of the garden. And there's a little okra plant there. So these are okra. These are Clemson spineless okra. Okay, so here is the Japanese long cucumber plants. There are seven or eight plants here on this trellis, which is probably way too many. I did read about pruning your cucumber plants. You can see cucumbers started there. We've got another one right here. So I started pruning my cucumbers just a bit to improve the airflow. But you've got to be very careful, because when you prune a cucumber plant, sometimes you cut the main stem instead of the offshoot that you want to cut. And that's what happened to me. I cut the longer one instead of the shorter one. But each of these nodes that the cucumber plant has several parts to it. So you have your tendrils, you have the main stem that goes all the way up, you'll have your sun leaf, and then this growth point that comes out. And it's kind of like a sucker on a tomato plant. And you have your fruit as well, your flowers and fruit. But when you these growth points are different for different cucumbers, different varieties. Some growth points, the offshoots, will produce female flowers, more female flowers, and the main stem will produce more male flowers. So you've got to be careful, and when you're pruning, make sure your variety isn't one that only puts out female or male flowers on the offshoots. So my advice would be, if you don't have to prune your cucumbers for airflow, leave them as they are. Here are the pickling cucumbers, and some of them have started to form as well. You can see one right here. These little petunias my son got me for Mother's Day, and I'm hoping that they'll fall out over the edge of the basket here. These are the tomatillos. They're starting to form some fruit. And there's another eggplant there on the end. And we've got a flower on it too. Now the eggplant has suffered a lot of damage from the flea beetle. So to combat the flea beetle, I just sprayed some neem oil spray, and I'll put the recipe that I use up on the screen here. But it is just some neem oil, and there's a flea beetle there. The neem oil, peppermint oil soap, and water. And I just put that in a spray bottle. Now my Butterbush tomatoes are setting fruit, lots of it actually. There's some larger fruit down here. So it's doing really well. That's the biggest Butterbush I have. And this tomatillo, like I said, was much bigger than I expected. So I did do some trimming to make sure my Better Bush tomato plant had plenty of room to grow. These pretty little flowers are zinnias. And they will get about 4 foot high and about 2 foot wide. Fill out that corner of the garden. This is my little sweetie cherry tomato. She's doing really, really well. Her seed was about 5 years old when she started. I have let her split twice, here and here. But I have been pruning her suckers off for the most part. So I'm hoping that she'll fill out this quarter of the trellis. And this is another yellow pear. They are so prolific. They're monster tomato plants. And then here you'll see the black Krim tomatoes. And these are good for slicing. And they are beautiful. Now, as if I didn't have enough tomato plants, I went ahead and planted some tomato plants here in this bed on stakes. So this is a San Marzano, a yellow pear, another San Marzano here hiding behind this cabbage. And then over here on these stakes I have a black Krim and another black Krim over there. Here are my ground cherries. There are about 6 plants here. And this is another Better Bush hiding with the kale. I have another Better Bush in this corner that's very small. They were planted at the same time, but they got into the ground at different times, so they're different sizes. Every part of the garden is a little bit different with sun and air and moisture. Here is the okra that I transplanted from over there. Now this one will do differently because it's going to have a different amount of sun. You can see that this bed is right now shaded by the trees here. And that bed is not. It's getting more sun. But they both get full sun, but this one just gets less sun. I have another eggplant here, and this is a ground cherry just like those. It was just got into the ground at a different time. I have some leeks around my ground cherries, a brassica in the middle, and this broccoli plant I have allowed to go to seed. So one broccoli plant instead of all of them was allowed to go to seed. I don't need that many seeds for my personal use, and I'm not selling them, so this will be all I need. Okay, I've got some more cabbage coming. They're not completely done yet. And I've got my black Krim tomatoes here on stakes. And I've also got a Better Bush hiding over here, which is a bush variety. You might see the stalk here of a cabbage. We left the roots in the ground because as it decomposes, it's good for the soil. We do have still some lettuce plants. These are romaine lettuce plants, and we are still harvesting off of those. We're able to use those in salads and in sandwiches. Those bottom leaves are still delicious. And the rest of the bed here is leeks that we are still harvesting one at a time as we need them, and they're still getting kind of big. They're not all completely ready yet. And in between the leeks, you may notice we have some small baby pepper plants started. So as the leeks come out, the pepper plants will have plenty of room to grow. This part of the bed is mostly pepper plants. This bed behind me on my left is the corn bed that I started. Now, if you've watched any of my previous videos, you may know that we tried corn in the bed that has now, the larger bed that has our watermelon, but it didn't come up. And so I had been reading about some of the things about corn, and the depth of planting is really important. And the reason it's important is because of the moisture level, the temperature, and the density of the soil. It's more consistent as you plant lower down in the ground. So if you plant your corn 1.5 inches deep, which is pretty much the minimum, your corn will come up and there will be roots started 3/4 inch below the soil. So the roots consistently develop 3/4 inch below the soil, no matter how deep you plant the corn seed. However, the soil at 1.5 inches deep could vary in temperature, in moisture, and density. As you go deeper into the soil and you plant 2 inches, 2.5 inches, or up to 3 inches deep, that soil is going to be more consistent in temperature, moisture, and density. The reason that this is important is, first, the moisture is important so the seeds don't rot or dry out. It has to be, kind of consistent in a medium, not too wet, not too dry. But also the density of the soil will be more consistent, and the reason that's important is because the corn needs to come up at the same time relatively. So if all of your corn comes up at the same time, it will tassel at the same time and you'll get better germination. If it comes up at different times and it's different heights and it has different growing rates, then your tassels will grow at different rates and you're not going to get as good germination. So when you don't get good germination in corn, each one of the silks in the corn represents one kernel. And if that one single silk doesn't get germinated, then you'll have missing kernels or undeveloped corn. So the more consistent you can get with the rate of growth throughout the corn bed, the more developed your corn will be. You're also going to give the corn the ability to stay in the ground a lot better. Corn has a tendency to fall over when there's a high wind. It can damage your corn or even kill it. You can support it, with stakes and ropes and fencing and things like that. But if you plant your corn a little bit deeper, that also helps it stay in the ground and be more stable and resistant against wind damage. So lots of things I learned about corn just because my corn didn't come up, and I started reading and researching to try to find out why. And so, as you grow as a gardener, you learn, and you learn from your mistakes. Mistakes are really a good thing because you really learn the most. When you make them, it's impactful. When you make a mistake and you fail at something, it's a little emotional, and sometimes you learn longer term when things are a little emotional. You remember better what happened. So I definitely I got discouraged about the corn, and I was feeling like I wasn't going to have any corn this season, but I have corn coming up right now. So it's only been 5 days and the corn is emerging from the soil. I don't know if I'll have consistent growth rates or not. I'll have to watch it and see, and I'll let you know as I go. Summer has just begun, and I'm already needing to think about fall garden things. So I'm gonna have to be starting my sugar snap peas and anything that takes very long to mature so that it can be maturing into the cold weather. All of our cold weather things are much sweeter as they mature into the cold weather, and so fall is the best time to grow cold weather things. Even though I did have a lot of success in the spring with cold weather things, I'm gonna have a lot more success this fall, and I'll have a lot longer harvests. So I've got to start thinking about the fall, and I'll start some things indoors, and I'll start some things in the garden in different places as the rest of the spring stuff comes out. So I'll be sharing that with you a little later on. And so I just want to say thank you so much for walking with me in the garden today. I enjoyed having you, and I hope you come back next time. Thank you. Bye-bye.